from a solar-powered shed 12 miles north of the New Jersey border. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to start and end arguments with relatives at Thanksgiving before they even get to speak. And now, a man whose annual physical results were so impressive, his physician asked him, "What's your secret?" The answer? Long walks with his dog, meditation, and hummus. All right, how did I do? Pete Coe is off this week, so I'm doing my best to recreate his introductions, which we all love so much. And I did get my annual physical, and it was very positive results. Very excited about my own health. How about it? Although it does look like I'm going to have to shit in a bucket for like the test for the colorectal test, and I don't want to do that at all, but I guess it's probably the responsible thing to do. Blood pressure's good, weight is perfect, and he told me the symmetry in my face just is astounding. He actually said I was an 8. Yeah, they rate you at my doctor's office. I was very flattered. He said, for 47, you're a solid 8 in terms of your physical prowess. So, yeah, pretty excited about that. And also reminded that I need to get back to donating blood. I haven't been doing that since the pandemic, but once, I think. And so need to get back into doing that. Always makes me feel good and purposeful to make a little deposit at the old blood bank. Well, folks, I have an awesome conversation with Barry Ritholtz on today's show, and I will be posting shows each and every day this week. No stand-up happy hour hangout because Thursday is Thanksgiving Day, and I'm taking much of the week off, but I am going to be posting shows, conversations with guests all week, so please look for the show and press play. Even if you don't listen, hey, give me the old download, you know? I'll take the stats. Before I get to my conversation with Barry Ritholtz, a couple things I want to mention and play for you. Keep your eye on the railroads, because a union representing rail conductors narrowly voted to reject a collective bargaining agreement orchestrated by the Biden administration, moving one step closer to a crippling freight rail strike that appeared averted just a couple months ago. So, Smart Transport Division represents 28,000 conductors. They rejected the deal early on Monday, and it'll be a very big deal if they can't come to an agreement on this. So I'm keeping my eyes on that. Also, this story, Alabama pausing executions after a third failed lethal injection. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, who loves herself some lethal injection and capital punishment, sought a pause, apparently, in order to top-to-bottom review of the state's capital punishment system Monday after an unprecedented third failed lethal injection. My Lord. The Death Penalty Information Center, an anti-death penalty group with large database on executions, said no other state than Alabama has had to halt an execution in progress since 2017, when Ohio halted Alva Campbell's lethal injection because workers couldn't find a vein. The executive director of the organization, Robert Dunham, said that the Governor Ivey was right to seek an investigation and a pause, but any review of the system needs to be done by someone other than the state's own prison system. Keeping my eyes on the Alabama Department of Corrections. Oh, and I loved this story I got to tell you about. The anti-woke bank, it's called Glorify, I guess, was the name of the bank. They're going to shut down, unfortunately. That's right. This bank was touted by folks like Candace Owens, who said we are at the beginning of the conservative economy. You guys will all be hearing about Glorify soon. It will overtake Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, and PayPal very quickly. Please remember you heard about it on my Twitter, and then she plugged it, Candace Owens, and that was in like a month ago, I think. And then Wall Street Journal news story today, anti-woke bank Glorify to shut down. So they laid off most of their employees and told them that they are closing up shop. What a shocking surprise about the conservative bank. And, of course, the big story over the weekend, the nightmare, horrible mass shooting at a Colorado Springs gay bar. The shooter, the accused man, 22-year-old guy, now is being charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of bias-motivated crime, causing bodily injury. So listen, when all of these right-wing pundits say they don't know what caused him to do this, that he might have just been disturbed, well, the cops are charging him with a bias-motivated crime. So I'm surprised that we haven't seen any of his writings on social media or anywhere else heard about them. I'm sure that law enforcement and investigators have, and we will probably find out. But for whatever reason, other than him just citing that gay bar on a drag queen night, they're charging him with hate crimes or anti-bias crimes. And I got some audio to play for you. First, here is the mayor of Colorado Springs. His name is John Suthers, and he is touting the heroic actions of the man who took down the Club Q gunman. Former Army veteran Richard Fierro is his name, and I've got some audio of him as well. He was on CNN. But first, here is the mayor of Colorado Springs.
I had the opportunity before I came here today to talk to Richard Fierro, identified as one of the two heroes that subdued the suspect in this case. And in my opinion, I think the opinion of everyone involved, saved a lot of lives. I won't talk about, the nature of what he told me about the incident. I will just simply talk about, I have never encountered a person who had engaged in such heroic actions that was so humble about it. He simply said to me, I was trying to protect my family.
Yeah. Guy actually sat down with CNN's John Berman last night and described that nature that he probably shared with the mayor there. And I usually don't play things like this, I guess, on the show, but this shooting was a hate crime, and this guy is a hero, and it's heart-wrenching to hear. And I'm not sure why I'm playing it, but I listened to both these clips, and I thought they were important, and I took something from them. This guy, everybody's going through something. I guess I didn't want to look away from this one. And if you don't want to hear it, I get it. But here he is. Richard Fierro, who was a married man. I think he's a straight guy, but he was there with his wife and his daughter, who apparently lost her boyfriend, was one of the victims, is what I'm gathering here from these clips.
Not out for a night on the town.
Yeah, but it lives in you. If you actually do this stuff, it's in you. I was proud to be a soldier. I don't like these guys running around here doing G.I. Joe stuff, and they're not. I'm not a G.I. Joe. I'm just a normal guy, man. I'm protecting my family, and I reached up and I did what I had to do. And honestly, I don't care about myself in that moment. I cared about everybody that was around me, and I cared especially about my family. As soon as I got done with that guy and the cop came in, I went across the room and started first aid with my friend who was shot in the chest and the legs and the arms. And I told her, Joanne, stay with me. Look me in the eye. Stay with me. And I moved her head so she wouldn't see her arm because he was shot. And Chip was right there. Her husband was reaching for her. So I put her hand in his hand so that they could be together. I didn't know if they were going to make it. This guy, man. This whole thing was a lot. My daughter and wife should have never experienced combat in Colorado Springs. And everybody in that building experienced combat that night, not to their own accord, but because they were forced to. And I told my daughter, for me downrange, it was always, hey, get in the next patrol. Get in the next patrol, and you're done. They get over it. Get in the next patrol. They don't have that option. Nobody in that building has the option to get on the next patrol. They got to live with this now until whatever it's a lot for any human, man. This kid that was helping me was kicking another human in the head, and I told him to do it. I don't know what to do. There was a beautiful one of the performers was walking by when the kid was getting tired of kicking, and she helped and kicked him with the high heels that she had on, and then ran because she's probably scared. I don't know what's going on in there. I was trying to get people to call the police. And that was it.
All right, there you go. Richard Fierro, the hero there, along with a couple of others. And tough to hear, but I did want to share it. Sounds like they kicked the shit out of that guy. and he was covered in blood himself. Apparently, he was put in arrested for a short period of time because they thought there's a lot of confusion and the direct aftermath of an incident like that, but just absolutely insane. Also thought this was really interesting and important to hear. This is a guy named Brandon Wolf. Now, he is a survivor of a horrific similar shooting where so many more actually lost their lives. I think I said it was 50 the other night when I looked it up. The Pulse nightclub survivor, Brandon Wolf, he is now the press secretary of Equality Florida, and he was just breathing fire on Joy Reid last night, and I thought this was a perfect thing to share after that.
Happening for the last few years, right-wing grifters, including politicians like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, they've been spewing this vile, hateful rhetoric about LGBTQ people. They've been trafficking in some of the oldest, darkest tropes against our community. They've been accusing us of posing a threat to children simply because we exist on planet Earth. And we warned them that inevitably this would result in violence, but they just couldn't help themselves. They couldn't help themselves from crafting one more fundraising email or hitting send on one more grotesque tweet. They couldn't help themselves as the temperature around the country continued to rise, as young people told us that life was getting less and less safe for them. They couldn't help themselves as armed protesters started showing up at drag shows across the country, or when white supremacists were being arrested outside of pride festivals. They couldn't help themselves when children's hospitals in Boston and other cities were getting bomb threats, having to install airport security terminals to keep people safe. They couldn't help themselves when a donut shop was firebombed for daring to advertise a drag show. And now 5 people went to a space that was supposed to be safe for them, a space like the one I knew well at Pulse nightclub, and they came out in body bags. Dozens of people were injured, scars they're going to carry forever. An entire community was terrorized. They paid the price for this short-sighted, cynical, and sinister hate that these people have been pumping into the ecosystem. I am angry because I am tired of asking, of begging, of screaming and scratching and clawing for people to just see us as human. See us as your family members, your neighbors, your friends. Please, I am begging you to treat us with a basic level of decency and respect. I'm angry because we deserve to live. Those people deserved to live, Joy.
All right. I thought that guy was awesome. That is at BJ Wolf on Twitter. Brandon Wolf. I'll definitely try to get him here on the program soon because he's a very well-spoken, passionate, fierce advocate for the LGBT community against this kind of horrible, sad, tragic violence. All right. Well, speaking of horror, the World Cup has started. And I say that because it's in the country of Qatar. That's how I'm pronouncing it. New York Times had some weird pronouncer. And if T.R. Dunstan or anybody else who likes to get on top of me for my mispronunciations wants to correct it, you can. Qatar, Vicky, stop it. You guys, someone tell me. Anyway, the country has all kinds of serious human rights violations, and apparently they turned migrant workers into basically slave labor to build all the stadiums for the World Cup. So there's plenty to be disgusted about, but I couldn't help myself. I love soccer. I love international soccer. I love women's soccer and men's soccer, and I definitely got excited to watch the game. I did. But here is John Oliver on the season finale of Last Week Tonight, the show, of course, that I work on, warming up the audience. Amazing episode last night, and a great in-depth look at Qatar and the World Cup. Here's just the first minute or so, but you got to watch the whole thing.
The World Cup got underway today, and we've talked before about the organisation behind it, FIFA, a cartel-like group of scumbags and assorted criminals who occasionally put on soccer matches. FIFA has always been terrible, which is what makes it a little hard to hear FIFA's current president claim that their event isn't just about sport. It's a net positive for humanity.
This FIFA World Cup, a tournament of peace and unity, will be the one that brings the world together after some difficult times. We should never underestimate the unifying power that something so unique has.
Well, that is some pretty grandiose talk coming from the star of What the Fuck Are Those Eyebrows, Charlie Brown. But the truth is a lot more complicated than that, which is not to say that I am not excited about the World Cup, because I am. It only happens every 4 years, and I look forward to it the way people with leap year birthdays look forward to leap years, with an enthusiasm somewhere between understandable and honestly kind of pathetic. And this World Cup is being hosted for the very first time in the Middle East by the small nation of Qatar, which is going all out to turn it into a major branding event.
Well, I'll stop it there, but you gotta see the whole entire show. Great show, beginning to end. At the end, they brought in a whole bunch of clowns on unicycles to represent how crazy everything has gone. And I work on the show, and I was there, and I walked backstage, and I just saw like 100 clowns. It was hilarious. I'll try to share some pictures on social media or to subscribers on Patreon. Anyway, let's get to my guest joining me today. I've got an almost hour-long conversation with the brilliant Barry Ritholtz, who many of you really love. People love when Barry joins me, and even this is edited down a little bit. We always have great conversation. I always learn a lot from talking to him. He's the co-founder, chairman, and chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's the host of The Big Picture, which is, that's his blog. The Big Picture is his very popular blog, one of the most popular in all of finance. His show is Masters in Business on the Bloomberg Network. He's on Twitter at Ritholtz, and we covered a lot in this conversation. Lots to learn, lots to talk about. I think you're really going to like this one. Here we go with at Ritholtz right now. Just recovering from COVID, by the way. We started right there.
You know, vaccines are a miracle. Can I tell you something? Anybody who voluntarily does not get the vaccine, I mean, it's just shocking, self-destructive foolishness. And I can't help but wonder how many GOP voters were dissuaded from getting the vaccine by everybody from the president on down, from Trump on down. I think it had an impact on the outcome of the election. Not just the people who are angry that 1 million Americans are dead unnecessarily, but like it turns out to be a bad tactic to kill your own voters. It's not a good strategy. And I think that in a lot of states that you saw some of the results were, marginal, hundreds or a handful of thousands out of hundreds of thousands. I suspect it might have had an impact. It's amazing.
What do you say to people who say, talk about their own cynicism, especially like younger people I get annoyed a lot with about big corporations? Because everybody gets it to a certain extent. Anyone can criticize a giant corporation, from Amazon to Target to a pharmaceutical company and like Pfizer. And there's plenty of legitimate criticisms. They've even killed people, by doing the wrong thing. But when people settle on this, for example, vaccine makers are big pharma, and they're lying, and they made this disease and stuff. Like, how do you ever engage anybody where they're younger or just kind of naive and they say, what is there an argument that you would make to somebody to convince them that, yes, giant corporations can do terrible things, destroy people's lives, the planet, and so on. They can also sometimes, let's be honest, vaccines are miracles.
So it depends on where they are and how far they are down the rabbit hole. Yeah. There's a great line from, I'm trying to remember the science fiction writer. So how far down you go, eventually you get to the point where the name will pop into my head. And I think it might have been Heinlein. Never try and teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig, right? So if I'm talking to somebody who's a full-blown QAnon, idiot, my response is, listen, you do you, but you should be aware of the fact that 10 years from now, you will look back at this period in your life and say, wow, I really fucked myself hard. And I can't believe the damage I've done to myself and my own family. No, eventually it'll come to them.
You think?
I think 90% of people eventually reach a point where they can't help but say, this wasn't the system. This wasn't the Jews. I fucked myself. I think a lot of people eventually get there just through the process of, aging and self reflection, and eventually, now maybe I'm being generous. Maybe it's 70%.
Well, either way, it's often too late for the destruction that caused their lives, the lives of their families, their financial health. I mean, people.
Darwin is undefeated.
Well, I mean, I guess the best example for you to probably talk to about that is somebody that invests in some fakakta thing, even though you tell them, don't do this, it's a scam. And then that kind of thing comes true quite often, quite quickly. And then.
That's exactly right. It's so the whatchamacallit, the feedback loop in something like politics. It's years, right? You vote for somebody because I'll have a drink with that guy. I like him.
Yeah. And
then he cuts your Social Security and Medicaid. And 40 years later, you're living on cat food. So that's a long, long cycle. If you believe in things that are completely false, the market tends to bite you in the ass pretty quickly. Now, with things like bubbles and crypto and whatever, sometimes it's months, sometimes it's years, but it ain't ever decades. It is usually, there's an opportunity to exit and to ring the bell, as we used to call it on a trading desk, lots of times. But, greed and fear are powerful emotions. And, I had a conversation with somebody. I'm trying to remember what he did. Whatever it was like a very middle of the road income job. And he had bought a bunch of crypto in like the early 2010s. And it was worth a life-changing amount of money, like tens of millions of dollars. And the conversation was, listen, I can't tell you where crypto is going to go. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But you can put this into the perspective of regret minimization. If you sell half and it goes up 10x, how do you feel? Well, I feel bad that I sold half, but I still have half and it's up 10x. Okay, if you don't sell anything and it drops 90%, it becomes worth a tenth, essentially the same thing in the other way. How do you feel? He goes, oh, I feel terrible. It's a life. I would have missed an opportunity. Okay, so that's pretty much your answer, right? I mean, if you're willing to sell half, I think the guy had like $30 or $40 million and he's making $60,000 a year. It's like, you understand right now, you sell half, you pay the taxes, your kids' colleges are paid for, their first house is paid for, your retirement is paid for. All, people don't realize money is just simply a tool. It may not bring happiness, but it can eliminate the lack of money blues. You could take care of your residency, your health care, your this, your that. If you have enough money so that your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I know a lot of people say that's a bullshit construct. It doesn't matter. All of your basic needs are met. Now you just have to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. That's a first world problem. That's a really good problem.
Yep.
Wait, I don't have to worry about eating or healthcare or all the things that make life without a safety net in the United States so challenging for the bottom, pick a number, 30, 40, 50% of the population. Yeah. Wow. Not only are you in the top quarter, top half of the country, you're in like the top 10% of the world in terms of not stressing out over just day-to-day living. And, he's like, but it could go up a lot more. Yeah,
it's interesting how those concerns change with whatever decade of your life you're into. And when it comes to like financial health and wealth, and you're in your 30s, you're thinking one thing, and maybe you get married, you get kids. In your 40s, it really is right. It can be really. I mean, that's where Val and I are always concerned about it, just in terms of our employment. But we're still a lot better off than other people. She's got family. I've got family that,
How many people in America get to work out of a she shed? I mean, that is just puts you're in the 1%, buddy. You're working out of the she shed. Few Americans get that opportunity.
I've been able to determine the kind of quality of life I want pretty accurately most of my life. And
that's interesting because most people are terrible at that. Most people don't know what will bring them happiness.
Right.
They focus on all the wrong things. Look, I got a driveway full of cars, and I really like those cars. But I know they're cars. They are not the secret to happiness. And I'm amazed how many people just
just don't get it.
Well, I disagree a little bit. You love cars. You love driving.
I mean, it's fun for me, but it's not. There's a difference between.
That's part of the quality of life, though. That's part of like if it wasn't such a rich person's ability and hobby. By the way, very worried about.
It doesn't have to
Jay
be.
Leno.
There are a ton of cars you can buy for well under. Pick your price point. You want to go buy $1 million car, you can. You want to buy $100,000 car, you can. You want to buy a fun $10,000 car, all right. So that's not nothing, but it's not top 1%. It's not she shed money.
All right. Well, the point is, it's hard to find what you want, and it's even harder if you do to get it or keep it. That I've certainly struggled with, but we're talking about. We're talking. I mean, if you're just talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean that's different in your 40s and your 30s and your 50s. That's the point I was making, thinking about talking about that. But I want to ask you about a bunch of other things. How much time do you have?
Sure. I got an 11:45 radio hit. So.
All right. Well, we'll go like 20 minutes more or so if you can.
Sure. I got an hour.
Okay. I think I want to try to explain to listeners who Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF as he's known, what FTX is. I don't really want to talk about crypto per se, but what I do know, as I saw on your Twitter feed, that apparently this young man who is, I guess, a billionaire in theory, he lost. I mean, I can't describe exactly what happened, but here's what's interesting. Your idol, Michael Lewis, has apparently been embedded with this young man for months. The point is, we are going to see and learn. This is one of the greatest American authors of our generation who's documented the most important things certainly in finance and in this country.
I am looking forward to the podcast interview that I will do with Michael when that book comes out. Sure. So I will be behind the 60 Minutes interview, but I will be ahead of a bunch of other crappy podcasts. So I'm super, super jazzed about that. I can't wait to read the book. He hasn't even written it yet. At least now he has an idea what the ending is like.
So it's just crazy to watch the downfall of this kid and crypto, we could argue, and that a reporter was embedded during the most important part of it. It's going to be fascinating. But without going too deep into it, why is this such a big deal over the last, I don't know, week or so? Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX company, crypto, and does Matt Damon's reputation take a hit for advertising crypto?
So I kind of think everybody who, other than Larry David, everybody who jumped on the crypto train is going to see their reputation dinged. The genius of Larry David is the ad he did for the Super Bowl is him just dissing all these inventions through time. It's so fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
The wheel. What are we going to do with the wheel? It's like he works his way. The fork. I got 10 forks. And then he gets up to the crypto exchange. He's like, I don't think so. It's hilarious. He's the only one who got paid to say, no, this sucks.
It's
because
great.
It's part of his persona.
Great. It's great.
The irony of that is just so hilarious. So first of all, the whole idea behind crypto is that so here's the narrative, which turns out to be sort of it's close enough to have and has enough little truth in it that you miss where it goes awry. But the narrative of crypto was, look, we can't trust central banks and we can't trust the government. They gave us the financial crisis. And so rather than rely on any one government's fiat currency, in our case, it's the dollar, here's digital money, here's internet cash, and you can use it and spend it. And the problem is with that story, well, it's kind of true. It wasn't so much the government as it was a whole perfect storm of things, including a whole lot of the private sector doing all sorts of reckless and irresponsible things. But the government didn't do the regulatory oversight they were supposed to, and the Federal Reserve had rates too long for too low. And, there's a million. I did a piece who's to blame. I think it was 1 through 25. By the time I was done, it was like 47.
On the financial crisis of 20.
On the financial crisis that actually ended up in Bailout Nation.
Right.
So that's the genesis of this. And so it started out as this kind of funky, counter libertarian sort of thing. But then the price started to rise and, there's no regulation, there's no oversight. And suddenly things start to go, higher and higher. And the next thing you know, we're at a pretty substantial dollar amount. We're at a pretty substantial dollar amount, and it's $5,000 and it's $10,000. And, people who were mining crypto by solving a mathematical problem that was what was built in originally as a way that more coins are created with a ceiling of 21 million coins. Eventually that just started attracting speculators, and then it started attracting hackers and thieves, and then it started attracting fraudsters. I don't know enough of the SBF story to say this guy was 100% a fraud, but gee, all the stuff we've learned, he dipped. It appears allegedly he dipped into clients' accounts to pay outstanding obligations.
I don't think you're supposed to do that.
The FTX was a crypto exchange. I think it was the third or fourth largest crypto exchange. There are very, very legitimate exchanges, Gemini being an example. Fidelity, the giant, investing giant Fidelity is setting up a crypto exchange. So the whole idea behind, look, money wants to be free from government, free from regulation. Stop and remember why we have governments in the first place. We have a government and laws and police because in the old days, whoever was bigger and stronger and more willing to kill more people got the most resources. That turns out to be fairly uncivilized and not a nice way to live. So, hey, let's set up rules and laws. And, it's not just the Bible that says thou shalt not kill. We're going to build that into our rules, and we're going to create property rights, and we're going to create contract laws, and we're going to create courts to enforce it. And this way, you don't have to worry about a bunch of armed gunmen coming into your house and saying, now we own this house. Crypto never quite wrapped its head around that. That's why, arguably, depending on which research you look at, somewhere between 20 and 30% of all crypto, all Bitcoin has been either lost or stolen. That's not the basis for a real currency.
Jeez.
The money fluctuates dramatically. You want to be able to actually have security. Listen, somebody used my credit card to buy a bunch of crap at a Walmart in Arkansas, and it popped up on the fraud alert. And not long after that, hey, is this? Have you been in Arkansas? No. Did you buy anything from a Walmart there? No. Great. We're going to cancel that transaction. We're going to cancel that card. We're going to send you a new one, and you're having a bank and having an FDIC to make sure that your money is safe in the bank. These are good things. I find the libertarians to be just the perfect example of what happens when a ideological philosophy is taken to an extreme.
Yes.
Now, I share some of their beliefs. I think if you want to use weed, you and I have had this conversation.
It's not a libertarian belief. Not a libertarian belief.
You can't use weed. I think if you decide that you've had enough of this life, or you have a terrible, expensive, painful terminal illness and you don't want to
physician-assisted suicide, again, not necessarily.
But that's a libertarian position.
I guess.
Now, when they say there shouldn't be a DMV and there should be no speed limits,
right.
As much as I think I could get on an Autobahn and go 200 miles an hour, I think that's a lot of fun, although I would much rather do that on a track in controlled conditions where you're not dealing with the same idiots who lack the insight to get a vaccine. So those people have cars. I can't get on a road at 180 miles an hour with them because they're not smart and they have bad judgment and they're filled with ignorant beliefs. So I want, I like rules. We like police. We like government. We like preventing the worst aspects of the dumbest people in society from negatively impacting everybody else. And that's my problem with libertarians. And by the way, huge, I've had debates with lots of libertarians, and the takeaway is most of the hardest core libertarians are either hypocrites or liars, or eventually admit, well, of course we have to have some rules. Okay, so you're not a pure libertarian. What's going on in my head? I think I could land a drone up here.
Oh, your hair? You got AD. What's going on in your head is ADD. You're talking about Peter Schiff is my favorite, the one to talk about with you. But
my Daily Show appearance with him could be the highlight of
That's right. Oh, that's right. That's right. Go Google Barry Ritholtz.
What do we call them? What's the politically correct word for them? Retards? We could pay, if there was no minimum wage, we could pay them $2 an hour and put them to work. So, I didn't think this was in the Jon Stewart era of the Daily Show. And I had written a piece on Walmart and Walmart, McDonald's being welfare queens, and how they've stopped the minimum wage from going higher. And so I didn't think I was going to be the asshole in that episode. But, it's the Daily Show, and I'm a finance guy, and I have a big target on my back. And when I heard that quote come out, I'm like, all right, I'm not the asshole. Peter Schiff, pay retards $2 an hour, and we're all much better off. By the way, that's not me using that word. I am verbatim quoting him. Find the segment. It's unbelievable.
Got it. Yes, I watched it, and I'll never forget it. And I forgot it. I guess I forgot it for a second there because I forgot that happened. And when I mentioned Peter Schiff. All right,
when you bring that up, that's my default position.
No,
$2 an hour.
Watch it. Maybe I'll go grab the audio of it and play it after our interview if it works.
People think, when I say that to people believe I'm making it up. And I've said, no, it was on the Daily Show. It's on YouTube. It was on my site. I couldn't make that up if I wanted to.
I want to ask you about inflation and supply chain. There are several different catalysts and reasons that all kinds of experts have attributed to the high price of things. I think it's really important to mention that it is broken records, inflation records in places like the UK. So we can dismiss that it's necessarily American government policies to some extent because it's happening everywhere and different countries are treating it differently. Our Fed, obviously, raising interest rates is the main, I guess, tool that we've got. But supply chain is 40% of inflation is the title of a post that you have. So what about energy? What about the war in Ukraine? Gas prices? What about, obviously, just the idea of price gouging for big companies just because they can? How do we attribute a percentage to why we have inflation? And most importantly, when is it going to go down? Ever? So
inflation peaked back in May and June, and lots of things have been already falling in price since then. So gasoline, food, lumber, copper. There's a giant list. Home prices have already begun to tumble. Used car prices. I have an ongoing Twitter thread where I just keep adding whatever the latest. I'll send that to you if you want to share. Because in June, I said, all right, we're at peak inflation now. And I just keep adding to this. And it's just amazing how many, this has been just a huge drop in all sorts of things. But hold that aside a second. Look, let's not forget how we got here. For most of the past 30 years, we've been in a deflationary environment, primarily driven by a combination of technology, which makes us all productive, globalization, which sends manufacturing to the lowest cost provider, outsourcing, automation, which is cheaper than having someone do something by hand, and frozen wages. The American laborer, especially the bottom 50%, the median income and below, they have lagged. Their wages have been deflationary. They have lagged everything from not just inflation, but productivity, corporate profits, C-suite, executive compensation. So that's one of the things. Those are the things that have been driving the environment up until the pandemic. Now you lock everybody in their house for 18 months. They can't go out and purchase services, meaning things like They're not going on vacation. They're not going to the movies. They're really not going to lawyers or accountants, or they're doing some of that. A lot of it is remote. But when you look at we're a service-based economy. We're about 61% services, 39% goods. When suddenly everybody is stuck in their house, all right, so we're not going on vacation. We're going to build a pool. And we're not going out to the movies. I'm going to buy a big screen TV. And we're not going out to eat. We're going to redo the kitchen and buy a bunch of new pots and pans. That shift had a huge impact on the ability for companies and the supply chain to deliver that to consumers.
A lot of hard goods.
Plus, here's $5 trillion, said Uncle Sam to the U.S. consumer. Try not to piss it all away at once. and to Americans' credits, they still are sitting on a ton of cash. They didn't spend all of it. They spent a lot of it. And that's in part why unemployment is 3.5%, and why the GDP has actually been far better than people expected. But now, as we kind of get back to normal, maybe we don't all go back to the office. Maybe it's a hybrid. That's where inflation came from. And as you unwind that structure, inflation should go back to normal more or less after that. I think maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes two. We're now 2 years into this. Inflation started to tick up late 2020. So here we are. It really accelerated last year. Here we are, 2 years later, and every sign shows that inflation is coming down. Everybody understands this. The midterm elections made it clear. Yeah, we get inflation was caused by everybody but the Fed. They're the only ones who haven't figured this out. I'm going to
get to that real quick. But just to be clear, if you want to minimize it, if you or one of your asshole finance friends was at one of your capitalist conferences and was there giving a keynote speech, they could simply say, if you want to know the simple cause for inflation, it was COVID.
If there was no COVID, we're not talking about inflation.
That's
right. If there was no pandemic lockdown, we're not talking about inflation. It doesn't happen. There isn't a $5 trillion stimulus. There isn't fiscal stimulus. There isn't the Fed at zero. There isn't all these things that clearly are problematic and have had an impact on that. Now, I did a post, which is at the bottom of today's post, who's to blame for inflation 1 through 15, back in June. And it's a run of people. Number 1, COVID-19. Number 2, Congress for passing massive fiscal stimulus. Number 3, President Biden's CARES Act 3. Number 4, President Trump, CARES Act 1 and 2. Number 5, consumers who overspent regardless of cost. And on and on and on. The funny thing is, I had corporate profit seeking as number 13. And more recently, I've kind of changed my tune on that because there is an increasing amount of evidence that suggests that corporate profit seeking is a huge percentage of profits.
Can you give an example of corporate profit seeking? We're talking about gouging, making people pay a lot more, and then they make a lot more.
It doesn't have to be gouging. It could just be, everybody's raising their prices 10%. Let's raise our prices 10%. So there was a study
even if their prices, their expenses didn't go up. Like the guy who runs the oil change near me, I talk to him about economics sometimes. He's like, I try not to change my prices when the price of oil goes up a lot, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah, but the price of oil, what's the biggest effect to the oil change? It's going to be the labor and the land.
But
right, it's like a restaurant. It's the food is the least expensive part of it. So the EPI did a analysis back in April.
Is that the Economic Policy Institute?
Yeah.
I like
and
them.
One of the fascinating things that they referenced was that from 2007 to 2019, they found that the half of, let me make sure I give this the exact quote. They found out that something like, and so they're not looking at the financial sector, they're looking at only the non-financial sector. They found that half of the increase, in that period, they find that about 11% of price growth is attributed to, I want to give you this correctly, that today 54% of the increase in profits is attributed to just expanding profit margins. Over normal periods of time, it's about 10%. So it's an enormous thing, and they're really the first ones that have quantified that. P.S. Historically, 60% of inflation is driven by wages. Now it's much, much less than that. So clearly, more is going on with inflation than just, rising wages and rising energy prices. The fact that we've had the market get shellacked by as much as 25% this year, and yet and rates have gone up as much as they have, which normally crimps profits, and yet profit margins haven't really dropped.
So who are you trusting, listening to, reading on the idea of a recession and what it means?
Well, I know what a recession means. That's defined by the NBER. It's a technical definition. So everybody
what
else
it means for the economy, like how the impact of it, like how serious is it? It's not obviously 2008, but it's, that's what I meant by what it means. But you're defining.
The economy is currently okay, and now it has it's a car that was going 75 miles an hour. Now it's going 35 miles an hour because it's dragging a weight behind it, which is much higher rates, higher credit, higher cost of capital. So that slows down the housing sector. It slows down anything purchased with credit. Automobiles, think about what you purchase. I don't mean like a credit card that you pay off at the end of the month. I mean, what do you purchase over time? So a car, a house, those are really starting to see a pretty substantial drag. We're still positive. The economy is still expanding, but we're slowing it. It is a very blunt and imprecise tool to say, I know how we'll stop inflation. We'll fuck the economy and we'll raise rates so high that it causes a recession. Well, that's kind of like saying, this patient is kind of sick. I know, let's drain all the blood out of him. That'll help it out. And so I try and draw the parallel between the Federal Reserve, who clearly doesn't know what causes inflation, didn't see it when it started, and doesn't know how to stop it.
How can that be? How can that be? These are the smartest people in the world.
No. Let's start with absolutely not. They're not the smartest people in the world. And we know that because A, they took rates to zero and kept them there way too long, despite many people saying, including current company, hey, why are we still on an emergency footing? And then when rates started to spike up, and I will admit I was one of the people who said, this is transitory. This will last, a year or so and then go back to normal. It's all about reopening post-pandemic. They agreed with that view and then very quickly reversed themselves and said, no, this is 1970s style inflation and we have to. My favorite data point is in the 70s, energy was almost 10% of the household budget. Today, it's about 3%.
Oh, wow.
So if energy doubles, it doesn't have the same impact today as it did in the 70s.
Sure. Wow.
And it's pretty clear that once the hostilities, the Russian invasion of Ukraine ends, energy prices should begin to come back to normal. I don't know when that happens. I can't imagine they're going to be there for years and years and years. They hopefully learned their lesson in Afghanistan. We didn't, but hopefully they did. And
well, if they learned a lesson in Afghanistan, they might not have invaded to begin with. But anyway,
I can't.
This is a far
figure
worse
out the motivation of a autocratic dictator, or someone like Putin, for that matter.
Yeah.
And he wants to stay in power. There's all sorts of like if I had a table like that in my house and people had to sit on the opposite end, it's like you're doing something wrong if you're that afraid.
I've been to your house. I feel like you do have a similar table.
So we have the things that pull out. So I could turn a table
get
of
back
6
to what you said about
into a table of 10, but not a table of 100. That thing is insane.
You were listing the different causes and where the war was having an effect and where it would be going, and if it didn't last much longer, and that's where we got off. Go ahead.
Yeah. So listen. One day, I love the scene in Apocalypse Now. One day this war will be over, son. Like wistfully, like it's a bad thing. what's his name? I think it was Colonel Duval says to one of
Robert Duval's.
One of the surfers. This war's going to end someday. He says with great, sadness. So this war will hopefully end sooner rather than later. The loss of life has been substantial. There are estimates that 100,000 civilians have been killed or wounded, and nearly as many Russian soldiers have been killed. This is, by the way, no matter what happens, this is just a debacle for the Russians, who want nothing to do with this. They don't know about it. And obviously, it's a humanitarian crisis for Ukrainians.
I think people forget so much about, and I don't because I remember witnessing it in the news and covering it to some extent, the revolution that young Ukrainians had, and they overthrew this guy who had stolen the election, who was a Russian, basically.
Right.
And they took over, and they had elections, and eventually they brought in Zelensky, and like they were never going to give up. They would rather die after that hard fought. They were in the streets for months. They were killed. They killed protesters. That generation of Ukrainians. Say what you will about them, because they're not perfect.
They are not fucking around. They are just Listen, an aggressive neighbor invades your homeland.
Yeah.
It's a different battle than
they have it. We have
to go 1,000 miles from here and kill civilians.
Yeah,
why do
it's
I want to do that?
motivation. Turns out motivation and interests are play a real role in a fighter in a war fighter's mind.
When right is on your side, it's a very different thing than conscripted. I don't want to be here. Why do I have to? It's a different headspace.
What else do you want to say about inflation or the Fed or making predictions about where the economy is going or markets are going in the next year or so?
The crazy thing.
Are you going to get a turkey? They've apparently even turkeys are hard to get, but that's more about the bird flu than anything else, I think.
Okay, if you say so. We go to Chicago every year for Thanksgiving. It's always a great time. Hopefully I'm testing negative before we leave. Yesterday was my first test. Was like a tiny little red line.
Gonorrhea is hard to shake. It's hard to shake.
Let me tell you something. And it's really difficult to get that swab in.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll clear up by Chicago.
Yes. So this is, this is me with COVID day 9. Today's Thursday.
You look great. You look great. Hair looks great.
I'm doing a peat beard, but I just don't have enough white.
Oh, I see what you're saying there. You're saying I look old.
No, I'm saying
that I look like a gargoyle or a goblin or Skeletor. I see what you're doing. All right, let's go then to.
I'm with that. Yeah,
let's go then to a cultural. I'd like to get, unless there's something else that you want to talk about in terms of finance or economics that I'm missing. I'm sure there's plenty of things, but I did want to ask you. You're a huge comedy fan, and I'm asking all of my Jewish friends about their thoughts on
Chappelle's opening monologue was just unbelievable.
I saw your tweet about it, and you really liked it and were not offended by it. By Jonathan Greenblatt at ADL said it was anti-Semitic, and so did Michael Cohen, my friend Michael Cohen.
So the ADL's job is to say it's anti-Semitic.
Well, other people thought it was too. I mean, I'm polling Jewish folks to see how they feel about it. You're a huge fan, and then you heard Jon Stewart's comments about it. I don't know if you did. I didn't think it was they were that particularly insightful, but I've heard a lot of talk about it. What are your thoughts?
What did Jon Stewart say? I'm curious.
It's hard to characterize. He was on Colbert talking about it.
I recorded that. I'll watch it. Look, I come at comedy from a different angle. I think that when you look at the role of the comedian, it's to entertain you and make you laugh. But from Lenny Bruce to Bill Hicks to Dave Chappelle, it's also the job of the comedian to poke the establishment, to make you think and to challenge the accepted assumptions. And
let me just toss this one factor out, which is given Kanye, Kyrie Irving, given the
Trump
violent
made
attacks.
America stay for anti-Semitism again.
Right. Given everything that's happened.
I get that.
So, and the question here is like, you have to understand the atmosphere that you're in. Some of these jokes might have been a little less hurtful or damaging as some people perceive them if there wasn't this unbelievable.
No, the environment is the jokes came into that environment on purpose. You can't take it out of that context.
Sure.
And he chose to be provocative, and he chose to be, I understand people's sensitivity. I'm less. Listen, I grew up in a neighborhood in the suburbs of New Jersey, at least until 6th grade, where I came home from school in 2nd grade and asked my mother, Mom, what's a kike? I never heard that word before. So
is it true that she said you, Barry? You.
Right. That's exactly what we are. Right. So it was, that sort of stuff always shocked me. Honestly, I've had this, we've talked about this. I don't understand anti-Semitism and racism. And there are so many reasons to hate people as individuals. Why do you have to, paint with such a broad brush? It just seems stupid and lazy. And that's only half jokingly. The people who believe that every Jewish person is the same and every black person is the same and every gay person is the same and on down the list, it's just the dumbest, laziest form of tribalism and going us and them. I think there's always been a close relationship between blacks and Jews in America because they both understood what it's like to be an oppressed class. And there's always been some form of simpatico. So, he dances right up to the line. Sometimes he crosses over it. The whole trans criticism he's gotten is a lot of it is just him trying to push the envelope. And I don't get insulted when a comic occasionally crosses that line because you don't know where the line is till you cross it.
Yeah.
So, yes, is the ADL going to be offended? Of course they are. I thought the opening monologue was, just sharp and funny and daring. And he's got giant cojones for stepping out and doing that. He's independent enough, financially independent, and has a core audience that he could pretty much say or do anything. I don't see Chappelle getting canceled the way Kanye canceled himself.
He had a show in like Minnesota at a theater canceled just hours before it when people were really upset. But I think that he somehow thinks that because he thinks he's the best of all time, certainly of his generation, that he should be the guy to take the hits for pushing the envelope. He should be. And if he gets pushed back, then that's where the rest of us are supposed to know where the boundaries are. I just think that that's not his responsibility. And I don't really applaud it as particularly brave myself, but I mean, he's my favorite comic.
Dude, it was.
So I feel, a lot of us are conflicted over a lot of the stuff that he does with the trans stuff, especially.
Look, hold his monologue aside for a second. I don't think there's a lot of debate that everybody in America has become or many people in America have become way too sensitive about way too many things. There was a piece, I don't remember if it was the Washington Post Sunday magazine or the Times Sunday magazine, about a professor talking about we just don't teach that subject because, trigger warnings amongst the freshmen, and I get reported for discussing this. That sort of lack of intellectual freedom on college campuses, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. And the world is brutish and nasty, and people are terrible. And you need to know that. You need to learn that. It can't be, I'm triggered and therefore you can't talk about this in front of me. Hey, here are the terrible things. It's funny. We watched a couple of shows during the pandemic, from Outlander to The Crown and the consistent theme throughout all these shows, regardless of the subject, are humans are horrible. We do terrible, terrible things to each other. We murder each other. We disembowel each other. We rape people. We kill people. We rob people. We just constantly are doing awful, awful things and have been that way throughout history. And so, I think, look, racism is a real problem in America. If there's any one thing to thank Donald Trump for, heading into 2016, you would have asked me, how bad is anti-Semitism in the United States? How bad is racism? How bad is anti-gay? I would say, I don't know, 5-10% of, you can't put 1 million people in a single place and not have 5 or 10% of them be total effing assholes. You just can't. So that was my assumption. Genuinely shocked that it's probably closer to 30 or 40%. Like some insane number like that. Like, are we really still talking about, the elders of Zion and these tropes from a century ago?
Yeah.
Like, come on. As a species, can we grow up? Can we become a little more self-aware and self-enlightened? So I understand the sensitivity to, hey, this is a continuum and it goes from 0 to 60 really quickly. You start out with Jews in Hollywood, and then the next thing it's Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville, although the order is backwards. It's Trump. The one thing we can thank him for is he revealed how deeply misogynistic, racist, anti-Semitic, anti-gay, anti-fill in the blank Americans are.
And gave them permission to be that way. Gave them permission.
Yeah. It's the conversation I've had with people who I know voted for Trump in 2016, but not in 2020, was, I know you like his tax policies, but you're the guy who told me Clinton has to go because he got a Hummer in the office, and character mattered. This is the most unfit president in the history of the United States for sure, and probably 24 other countries.
Turns out character doesn't matter as much as judges.
Well, the irony is that you and I have had the conversation before about how Roe v. Wade hurts Democrats, right? Do you recall?
Yeah,
the
discussion? I've had it with you and others. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the reason for this is just simply it allows people in purple states and purple districts to say, look, I'm against abortion, but Roe is the law of the land and it doesn't matter. You can elect me because you like my tax policy. That stuff stops. That stuff has gone away. And clearly Dodd had a huge impact and is going to continue having a huge impact. I'm curious, in New York State, where a lot of conservatives won in swing districts, partly because the governor did a terrible job campaigning, not a great candidate, and New York State Democrats, deservedly had their ass handed to them because they ran bad campaigns. I bet a lot of those people are one-termers. They're not going to be around.
Well, yeah, I would arguing, and it's really nauseating to me to hear the opposite argument at this point. I've just read so much evidence about it, and of course, anecdotally, that the big win for a lot of these guys in New York was that they ran on a ghost issue that they made up, not unlike CRT 2 years ago. Yeah, the crime issue was I live in the third safest county in America, and all of a sudden I have a Republican congressman for the first time ever because he talked about the crime all the time, and I'm looking around at my neighbors and be like, where? Right. Do you even know anybody who's been?
What's the safest large city in America?
Yeah, and of course,
New York.
Is it the safest, largest city in it? Yeah.
Safest, largest
I
city.
send my kids.
When you look at
it's just
so if it leads, it bleeds, and there's always a series of terrible stories that show up on the news. But there are 7 million or 8 million people live in the city, and another 5 or 10 million people are there every day. In addition to that, and that's a really serious.
But it's an issue that they ran on and scared the shit out of people. Which I blame anybody who votes on things like that. I'm like, it feels like it's more dangerous. It's not. Look,
it began under Trump. You had a huge uptick in crime, and especially racial crime.
Well, it's hard to know what the causes are. Probably, it's always hard to know the causes, but we do have ways of measuring.
The pandemic was some of it.
Sure, but we have ways of measuring violent crime. We have ways of measuring safety and security. And if you live in a safe and secure community, and you chose to live there because it was safe and secure, and you pay a lot of taxes and bullshit, affluence, and all that, then stop making things up. Like you can't have it both ways.
Who's the correspondent from the Daily Show who goes to all the Trump rallies and interviews people? So his stuff is amazing. He's talking to some woman in Kansas who was concerned about immigration and concerned about safety, and he's like, "What's the crime rate in your town?" "Oh, this town is very safe." "How many immigrants you have here? Illegal immigrants?" "None." So shut the goddamn television off and deal with reality. They're just not. And you you got to give them credit for figuring out an issue that is pretty, they're been pretty successful with it, which is really quite stunning.
Any other thoughts about the midterm elections? I know you're a data guy. You looked at a lot of the polling stuff and the things that were being said. Any other reactions to the midterm elections?
Yeah, so I wrote actually a long blog post on that the day after the election because, one of the keys to being a good investor is understanding what you do know and what you don't know and having some humility about it. And I love when a huge swath of professional pundits get something wildly wrong. So, starting with the polls were terrible. And I had tweeted something the night before of the election that showed this go round, there were a whole bunch of Republican leaning pollsters like Trafalgar and go down the whole list. And so they're all predicting a red wave. I think they had the governor of Michigan losing by 14% or 16%.
Wow, really?
And so when you take these, well, any one pollster can be wrong, but we take the average. Well, no, not if you're adding, 20% of the pollsters are just made up bullshit. Sentiment readings are junk. I've been writing about that for a long time. How is the consumer sentiment reading 6 months ago? How is it worse than the 9/11 attacks, the dot-com implosion, the financial crisis?
You're saying it's not. It's just a bullshit measurement taken in the bullshit
way. No, it's that
way.
people are spilling their partisan crap into how do you feel about the economy? Yeah. As soon as there's a great chart I posted years right after the election. As soon as Trump won in 2016, the Republicans' assessment of the economy jumped 30%, and the Democrats' assessment dropped 10%. So both sides do it, but not equally. And then when Trump lost, the exact opposite happened. The Republicans dropped like 30, 40%. The Democrats ticked up a little bit. So sentiment is garbage. Inflation, everybody knows that it's caused by the lockdown and the big fiscal stimulus. And do you remember those Joe Biden stickers? I did that were on the gas
I still see them at the gas station.
I put a chart up in this unconventional wisdom post that shows that gasoline prices today are about where they were in 2011.
Wow.
In other words, you've had zero inflation in gasoline for a fucking decade. And just shut up. And so there's that. Polling, we know, is fundamentally unsound. How do we know that? Because when you ask a human being, what are you going to do in the future? What's your behavior going to be 1 month, 6 weeks, 10 days from now? They have no fucking idea. They don't know who they're going to vote for. They don't know when they're going to vote. They don't know if they're going to vote. Humans can't predict their own behavior. Forget predicting the economy. If I ask you, how much are you going to spend on Christmas this year? You don't know, which is why
I never get anybody anything, so probably nothing.
So zero. So you're going to be consistent with the past. I always send people books. I find books.
You do. You've sent me books many times, and
I find books are a great gift. It's like, here, you're ignorant. Learn about.
You sent me Barack Obama's memoir. You sent me the Jewish Comedian's
book. That was a good book
last year, which I love.
Right. And the book has to be relevant to the person.
You also sent me
the history of Jewish comedians is it's pretty.
Great. I did think when we first met, you sent me The Fountainhead, which I was disappointed with. But
God, I think I had to read Atlas Shrugged in college, and I'm in the middle of the 93-page speech, and I go to the professor's office hours and say, "Listen, I'm okay reading stuff I disagree with, but this is drivel bullshit. I can't read this."
Wow.
And so here are our choices. Assign me a different book, give me a 0, or I drop the class. But this is clearly Drek, and I can't be bothered.
Oh, that's hilarious, dude.
So they're like, well, I'm trying to show you a different... I go, it's not the politics. I'll read William Buckley. He is a talented writer and a brilliant person. This bitch is just fucking crazy, but at least she's a god-awful writer. So there's a
book
famous,
probably how many people have been radicalized or influenced by that book? Probably almost more than almost any other book.
There is
when it comes to these issues.
There is an incredible quote. I don't remember. I don't think it's Krugman, but I think Krugman promoted it. There are two novels that can change a bookish 14-year-old's life. The Lord of the Rings and Atlas Shrugged.
Right.
One is a childish fantasy that often engenders a lifelong obsession with its unbelievable heroes, leading to an emotionally stunted, socially crippled adulthood, unable to deal with the real world. The other, of course, involves orcs. and that is the greatest single quote about
Atlas Shrugged. That's great.
Atlas Shrugged that there's ever been. It is just truly, truly genius.
All right. What else?
I'll send it to you.
I'll wrap it up. What else? Anything else?
You know, I'm kind of excited about coming to the end of what has been one of the worst markets in 40 years. It's not that the stock market was down so much, but that there was no place to hide. Stocks were down, bonds were down, real estate was down, crypto was down. Everything was down except private equity. For some reason, private equity seems to have not marked any of their things down. That's how you know they're full of shit, that their marks are made up. But hey, you know, come up with a price and we'll just write it down. So there's that. How do
you predict this market is ending? This cycle?
So I am of the belief that we are in a long-term secular bull market that was reset during the pandemic, which was like an asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs. It wasn't a financial collapse. It wasn't a market collapse. It was something from outside of that. And so dropping 34%, putting $5 trillion into the economy, that's a big reset. And we went up so much from the bottom of the pandemic. So the S&P 500 from down 34% rallied 68% in 2020 to finish the year plus 18%, which is crazy. And then in 2021, the markets were up 28%. These numbers are just huge because markets average about 8% per year over long periods of time. So you gain 68% from the lows and then you add on another 28%. We were just overdue for a pullback. And I said that, you know, first quarter of 2022, I said in pullback and in public, hey, we're just due for a little mean reversion. You can't go up that much and not give a little back. You can't just go straight up. Right. So down 25%, I wrote publicly, hey, I'm a buyer here. And I also explained, don't try and guess the bottom. It's rare. Buy a little now and buy a little in 2 months and buy a little 2 months after that. And 5 years from now, you're going to be happy. I can't tell you what happens 12 to 18 months from now, but I could tell you 10 years from now, stocks are very likely to be appreciably higher. Certainly 20 years from now, probably 5 years. But, you know, that's just what history tells us. And so we always warn our clients, hey, we are expecting markets to be volatile. We just had too many gains. I do a quarterly call for clients and try and say, here's what we know from, you know, you want to take the day-to-day watching grass grow, watching paint dry, then put it into long-term context because, you know, the day-to-day noise is a giant distraction from just being a good long-term investor. Yep. People have a hard time with that.
That's why I love you, because you've been saying that since I met you.
But it's true. You know, markets go up, markets go down, but there's just no guarantee.
We want everything to be sexy and exciting and profitable all the time, and to talk about it, and to not instant gratification, and you know,
right. That sort of crazy. How do I describe it? You know, the media coverage is very much focused on all the wrong things.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to even explain it. It's the focus is on what's sexy, what's exciting, what's fun, what really makes us feel like, you know, we know what's going on, and it's entertainment. You know, look, I've been doing TV for 20 years now, and my partner is on TV, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. We are very much aware of the fact that it should be boring. It's not supposed to be entertaining. If you're entertained by finance, I was just telling this story on another podcast. I started as a trader, and I figured out, it was like a moment of shocking self-awareness. I figured out I was having way too much fun. Hey, if you're having this much fun, you're probably not working. You're probably just looking, give me a vein. I'm looking for that dopamine hit, and which is why I went into research and to, doing analytics and not being plugged in. I'm right now, I'm out trying to buy some stock in my personal account, and it's a rounding error, but I'm much more excited about that than what's going on with $3 billion. And that's how you shouldn't be swinging around $3 billion. You should buy that money and buy those stocks for the long term, because if your dopamine and endorphins are enjoying it, then it's entertainment. It's not.
I've never asked you for a stock recommendation, like on the podcast. Do you ever give out stock recommendations on shows and stuff like that?
Yeah, I say buy the S&P 500 and revisit it in 20 years. SPY is the ETF. The cost on it is a brutal 4 basis points. It costs you, 4 cents per $1,000. It's cheap. It's easy. It has outperformed everything else over long periods of time. Yeah. You don't have to worry about some guy like, it's not even SBF who you only invested with if you were using his crypto exchange. But, even Zuckerberg at Facebook, who has 2 share classes, so he controls all of the voting. He said, I know I'm going to spend $15 billion on the metaverse. And now Facebook is worth half of what it was worth. Look at Tesla, the wealthiest man in the world.
Has that been a bust?
Well, it was a giant win. It had a huge run up leading till it was added to the S&P 500. Tesla now, I think, is almost cut in half. Let's take a look at how far off its highs it is.
Oh, I didn't even ask you about Elon Musk or Twitter.
The Elon Musk needs to surround himself with some, everybody around him is a yes man. He needs to surround himself with some no man. Off of its high, it's 55% off of its highs. So Tesla has been cut in half.
What's that as a result of? A lot of things?
I think a big part of the run-up was an anticipation of it being added to the S&P 500. So you create, an artificial price increase. I've been writing about all these other car companies coming out with EVs, and they're actually really well made and lack some of. So Tesla is still ahead of everybody in terms of software, and they're still ahead of everybody in terms of the charging network. But the rest of the auto manufacturers are catching up. And so the giant, when Tesla was practically $1 trillion valuation, the assumption was nobody else is ever going to sell another electric car. They're going to have the market to themselves. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, 80% of the cars will be electric by 2030. It's pretty clear that the giants, and that includes Volkswagen, Audi, GM, Ford, go through all the lists. Hyundai isn't just cranking out. I don't know why Toyota is lagging so badly. They had the hybrid market to themselves for so long, and then they just missed the boat with it.
Yeah, they had that leaf.
But GM and Ford, VW, which includes Audi and Porsche, Hyundai and Kia, you have now a legitimate choice. Listen, as much as I like the Porsche Taycan Turbo S, it's $187,000. That's not going to move the needle in terms of reducing auto exhaust. But the VW ID5 and ID4 and then a few of the Hyundais, these are 30, 40, and even the low-cost Tesla, these are 30, 40, $50,000 cars. There's a lot of choices in that space, and it seems, maybe there'll be hybrids for another 5 years as a transitional technology, but I don't see anybody buying internal combustion engine cars 2030 and later. They're just going to be gone.
Well, they've made laws against them in California and
New York. It doesn't matter. You can make all the laws you want. The market has already made that decision. Right. And full credit to Elon Musk for making that happen. Without Elon Musk, and we've talked about this before, and Jeff Bezos, that doesn't happen. Why Jeff Bezos? Bezos just steamrolled a dozen industries. And when Musk started selling EVs, the automaker said, hey, we're not going to let Musk do to us what Bezos did to retailers, what Bezos did to, home delivery, on and on and on, all those things. So I give Musk a lot of credit. He's done a huge amount of good for the world. Now, should he have bought Twitter? Probably not. It's not worth $44 billion. He doesn't understand the platform, and he's kind of, a jerk about it.
Kind of.
But
he's a huge
give him credit
asshole
for helping to stop climate change.
Well, I mean, you're giving him a little bit too much credit, I think. I mean, the guy came from billions of dollars and a lot of other people.
He didn't start with the billions of dollars.
Didn't his dad the owner of a fucking jewel mine or some shit?
Oh, that I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, this guy was born on third base. He's made some good investments, but he's got a lot of smart people, obviously, around him. I don't know. I feel uncomfortable with how much credit you're giving individuals is making me feel unsafe.
Listen, no debate. Tesla changed the game for automobiles.
Fine, but
game changer.
There would be no Tesla without all these other different circumstances and people and money that he got his hands on.
I am more generous of spirit than you.
No, you're not. You're being too generous of spirit while talking about an absolute monster of a man.
All right. Well, listen. Thanks for coming by. We've been speaking with Pete Dominick on She Said. Right.
She shed. He shed.
By the seashore. Right.
Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
All right, there he goes, Barry Ritholtz, everybody, at Ritholtz, and that is the show. An hour and 21 of information and insight, and hopefully a little lightheartedness as well, weaved in throughout. I thank you for listening and reviewing on Apple and Spotify. If you haven't done that, it'd be great if you did. Go subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/standupwithpete. We're putting up videos all the time. And support the show with a paid subscription. If you haven't already, go to standupwithpete.com right now. It is a free show, but it isn't cheap. It costs me a lot of time, and I'll be posting all week. So look for new episodes every day, even on Thanksgiving. And that's it. That's all I've got for you. That is Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Jon Carroll singing. And this is me talking over him, and it's not great. So take it away, John.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance a voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand